So this user, known as Fishy, was the first out of the two viewers that actually tried to address what I was saying in the video against Elden Ring. They actually tried to spin an argument in the game's favor from what I was saying that's wrong with the game in the video. And I commend them for trying. So I'm going to go through this comment to pick it apart. And then I'm going to go through my response, which I also captured screenshots of. So let's see what this person has to say. I'll attempt to take your pinned comment since you definitely implore at least one person to try. I'll begin with the statement following the line I just quoted. Claiming that your opinions is fact is a complete fallacy. It's not. You are providing a subjective opinion based upon your reasoning and calling it a fact, because what I'm saying is factual. As for what constitutes a legit critical take is much more subjective. You have every right to call any form of feedback a legit critical take. No, that's not how that works. If that was the case, then user reviews on Metacritic would all be legit critical takes, but we all know that's not the case. Is it? On an aside, is it only you who is allowed to make insulting and derogatory comments? Yes, because it's my platform. I'm all for holding a civil, tame conversation with differing viewpoints. However, you are a hypocrite if you are calling people out for actions you yourself take in literally the exact same comment. No, because the point is, I'm actually pointing out what those people are doing by acting in the same manner, on purpose. You see, that's what a lot of people don't get about the way I handle comments on my channel, and the way I respond to idiots on my channel. That's what a lot of people don't understand. But continuing onward, I will attempt to write my arguments in a chronological order as I progress through your video, but you should understand that there are limits to what someone can write, and that comparing discourse in a written thread has different limitations to a 2-hour video. Let's begin with the performance. This was and still is a massive issue surrounding the PC port. It is unforgivable for a AAA studio to release a game in such a state in 2022. Well, at least someone gets it. The game ran well on consoles, but the PC performance is still not what I would call acceptable from a AAA dev. Yeah, that's not the only thing that's not acceptable. But pressing onward, your statement about you gotta be well over level 100 to beat all the optional bosses is factually incorrect. There are people who have beaten nearly every boss at level 1, and it's only a matter of time until they completed literally every boss at level 1. You claim that the combat is boring, right after saying I'll stand around and let the AI do it. You are making the combat boring, spam rolling more than needed. You don't need Mimic Tier, as people have done at level 1. Solo, no summons. Shields are not irrelevant due to OP boss design. They are still a valid tool up until the very end when used appropriately. You sarcastically claim that this is a 9 out of 10 game, the pinnacle of gaming, making you fight nonsensical bosses ad nauseum, when that's literally the design of the games that FromSoftware makes. You are not meant to face something and beat it on your first try. You try over and over, and learn the boss's moves, patterns, and overcome them. Is it overrated? It's hard to say, since I and many others think it's a fantastic game, but others don't think it is. And there's no correct answer to if something is good or not. Yes, there is. When people go to school for game design, there are rules that they have to learn. Rules that apply to how to make a game, how a game is supposed to function without breaking down. And then, if they want to make a specific game in a specific genre, if they want to make a first-person shooter, or they want to make a horror game, or they want to make some kind of third-person action game, which is what Elden Ring is, there are rules that they have to follow within said genre to make a good game from said genre. So the answer whether something is good or not from an objective standpoint can be debated based on established pre-existing conditions, rules and guidelines that exist within different genres. This doesn't just go for video games either. This goes for music, and it also goes for movies. Most of what makes literally anything good is subjective. Again, as I just stated, no, I completely disagree with that. And the reason I disagree is based on facts of what I just said about genres and rules and guidelines and how that works. You claim that nothing happens once you beat the game, because nothing does happen when you beat the game. But you see what happens when you resume. It places you in the world state just prior to you completing the final boss. Okay? And a lot of video games do that. That's not the point I was making when I said that in the video. Pressing onward. I am writing this as I go through your video, since that seems like the best way to catch your points in such a long video. I appreciate you stating about 25 minutes in that this is purely your opinion. And how ironic is it that the video was still derailed and still infested with trolls, fanboys, shills, drones, whatever the fuck you want to call these idiots, these FromSoftware idiots, this cult of FromSoftware. How ironic is it that the video was still debunked after I verbally stated in the video that the whole video is based on my viewpoint. And even though everything that I said about Elden Ring in the video is factually correct, it's still from my viewpoint. And I stated as such in the video, and motherfuckers still got butthurt. I guess FromSoftware fans really have a childlike mentality, more so than most other gamers. My only feedback would be to place that statement earlier on, since much of your tone up until that point in the comments paints you in an air of objectivity. Because when I make a video about something and I review something, be it a movie or a game or a piece of music or writing or whatever it is, I come at it from an objective standpoint. Pressing forward with this person's comment, thus far they haven't really done a good job to present an argument against anything that I stated, but I at least appreciate the effort, unlike most. And here's what Fishy had to say about the story. The story in all of the FromSoftware games is presented in a short but relatively dense intro cinematic covering the base idea of what the game and your overall objective is. Yeah, it's too bad they don't introduce much else after that intro cinematic. It seems to be an issue with all of the games that they release. In Elden Ring, they introduced the major objective and the key players in the plot. That word plot, because it doesn't really fit to put the word plot in Elden Ring in the same sentence. Then you are then thrust into the world with the singular objective of becoming Elden Lord, and the rest is up to you. Yeah, the rest is up to you to interpret what essentially is the lack of a story, the lack of a plot, the lack of a narrative, the lack of a point. You mentioned how many of the bosses are random monsters, seemingly randomly placed, because that's what they are. But like with their previous games, the story and backstory of these actors comes from interaction with NPCs and item descriptions. Fuck item descriptions. I don't understand this whole thing with item descriptions. That's not fucking storytelling. Item descriptions and simple interaction with NPCs is not storytelling on its own. Fucking Christ. Alongside ambient storytelling. You say it's a problem that there is no narrative structure. But that is exactly what so many of us find intriguing and engaging. Yeah, I know, that's the problem. You say there is no narrative or reason to care, but all of that information is there. It's on the player to find it or not. Bullshit. I personally find that incredibly refreshing. Not having everything just blatantly told to my face, but me going and finding out who I'm fighting, why, how they ended up that way, who they're tied to. Come to think of it, the idiots within the cult of FromSoftware must be big fans of Terrence Malick. They must think his movies are just fantastic, since not everything is just blatantly told in his movies either. I actually want to see that. I want to see a FromSoftware fanboy sit down and watch a Terrence Malick movie and tell me what they think of it. Because I'm pretty certain their response is going to be what my response is to the so-called story in these games. The reason to care is what you make of it. You can say there's no reason to care about anything in any context. That is a nothing argument. No, that is a something argument. Because it's the truth. And there's a very specific reason why that's the truth. The information that you're saying is not present is actually all there, but just not spoon-fed to you. No, what is there is bits and pieces that have been randomly stitched together. And Hidetaka Miyazaki is too lazy to actually give the players anything else to work with. The statement, there is not a single line of dialogue from your character, is incorrect. There are choices you make framed as you are responding to questions. That is dialogue. Is it spoken? No. But that doesn't mean it isn't there. Yeah, I'll get to my comment with that once I go over my comment in response to this one. There are too many games to name that have mute protagonists. It's a staple of that JRPG genre. Oh boy, are we really going there? Are we really going there? The reason to care about your character is the fact that it is your character and your representation in this world. You are free to make them however you want, and do pretty much whatever you want in your quest to become Elden Lord. You care about them the same way you care about Joker from Persona 5. Oh my god. Oh. What? Just. Okay. Or other silent protagonists. The rest of your tirade about nothing and no one being interesting is impossible to argue any further. Yeah, because you did a great job arguing with everything that I stated thus far. So you just decided to up and quit and give up at a certain point because your argument didn't have any legs to stand on in the first place. You want them to be pointless and meaningless, so you ignored everything that was there. That right there is what you would call an assumption. It is not a good idea to use assumptions when you're debating a topic, any topic. There are, in fact, plot lines to follow for the various characters. I wouldn't really call them plot lines, as much as I would call them quest lines. There's a difference between plot lines and quest lines. A huge difference. And that difference is this 4-letter word, plot. Even the guy you are talking to in the gameplay behind this section, Rogier, has a plot line and motives. You can completely ignore them if you want to, which I assume you did, but to say they are not there is incorrect. I need to break this into multiple comments. And there was another comment that this person posted that I responded to. I think there was 1 or 2 more. I didn't capture those. I didn't get to capture those other 2 comments, but I did post a response to those comments, and I will go over that response as well. So, already, this is not a very compelling argument for a variety of different reasons. But let's see what I had to say, what my rebuttal was to this rebuttal. Claiming my opinion, which are based on facts, is the complete opposite of a complete fallacy, but whatever helps you feel better about your argument. I'm providing truth. You can either choose to accept the truth or not, take it or leave it. What constitutes as a random insert denotation here has not a damn thing to do with the video. Thus far, your comment is mindless rambling, which leaves me unconvinced. So to save myself time, I'll skip to the part where you actually respond to one of my criticisms I've made about this game. There are people who can beat anything at any level. Those people are in the minority. I critique things based on the majority. I don't care about some random asshole who sat down in front of a TV or computer screen and played endlessly for hours to achieve perfection. They're not a part of the conversation, and clearly the game was designed for you to be at a certain rank at very specific points throughout the entire experience, hence the comment about what level you need to be at when you find certain bosses in the game. The quote, "I'll stand around and let the AI do it," is a joke that flew straight over your head. The entire game is spam rolling. That's more than half of your defensive capability based on FromSoftware's intent with the now outdated combat system. Again, this is truth. What I'm saying right now are facts. Most of your defensive capability in these Souls-like games is spamming the dodge roll button. Now, moving on to what his comments was about my comment regarding Mimic Tier. You do need Mimic Tier. Otherwise, they wouldn't have put it in the game. Again, I don't care about the 1% of no-life fanboys who played the game trying to achieve perfection. Those players don't represent the majority, but an extreme minority. So the part of this person's comment when he stated that my comment regarding you have to be at over level 100 in order to beat Elden Ring, and he brought up all these random players that were playing at level 1, uploading no damage videos on YouTube. I'm sorry, but those players don't represent the majority. At this point, you may as well bring up players who were able to beat these games with other controllers on platforms they weren't originally intended for. Like I remember a few years ago, there was someone who was disabled who beat Bloodborne with their feet, and this person's accomplishment went viral over the internet. Clearly, such a person doesn't represent the majority of the people that bought the goddamn game, right? And clearly, just using some basic common sense, the people that this person is talking about aren't playing the game in the conventional way that FromSoftware originally intended. FromSoftware, like any other development studio, doesn't design games for the 1% of players that can beat their games blindfolded. Because then no one would be able to beat their games, right? That would be bad for business. Clearly, you're supposed to be at a very specific rank, a very specific level at various points throughout the experience. Like when you fight Millennia, for example, you need to be at least level 120 in order to stand a slither of a chance against that boss. For the players that are able to beat these things at level 1 unscathed, those people don't represent the average consumer that spent money on this game. I'm sure there's someone out there, some crazy ass motherfucker out there, who beat Silver Surfer on the SNES without taking a single hit. I'm sure there's a crazy ass bastard out there that's done that. That still doesn't make Silver Surfer a good game because someone out there was able to beat the game without taking damage. And the same logic applies here. Continuing onward with my comment. The design of the game that FromSoftware made is the problem, hence the same critiques against their games repeated with each new one they release, because each new one they release is a repeat of what they've already done. Learning a boss shouldn't take dozens of attempts over and over. That makes a game repetitive and mindless, which in turn makes it boring. And what I just said right there is the biggest problem with these Souls-like games, and the biggest problem with FromSoftware as a development studio, which is set in stone from the beginning of the game to the end, is what ultimately makes the game super repetitive and mindless and boring. Their game design is outdated and dull. Is it overrated? Yes, it is. That's not subjective, that's fact. I and many others think it is a fantastic game. Well, you and many others have low standards, which is another problem for another topic for another time. And just using another separate example outside the video game industry, there are a lot of people that like Taylor Swift, right? There's a lot of people that like Kesha. There's a lot of people that like Justin Bieber. And neither of those artists, using that term very loosely, make good music, by fact. Using the majority as an argument does nothing except make your argument weaker, because most people that are out in the world are stupid. Anyone who's worked a customer service job knows what the fuck I'm talking about. Anyone who's worked in the retail industry knows what the fuck I'm talking about. People in general are fucking idiots. The vast majority. It's sad, but it's the truth. Just because the majority likes something doesn't make that something good. When you resume, it places you in the world state just prior to you completing the final boss. So, you literally just emphasized my point. You get nothing for beating the game. You accomplish nothing for beating the game. You are awarded nothing for beating the game. The whole thing was a waste of time from start to finish. So when you complete Elden Ring, unlike in most other video games, you don't get like a special item or some kind of unique power-up or a new difficulty level or a new weapon or some kind of badge or, some kind of stamp of completion other than the worthless fucking achievements in the game. So, because you don't get anything for actually making it through all the way to the end, both before and after the end credits, it seems to me that indeed the whole thing was bullshit all the way through. Continuing onward, I personally don't think that derivative game design is a bad thing. Well, that's obvious, ain't it? This goes back to the low standards argument, which seems to be very credible at this point, since it feels they took the aspects from their previous titles and wrapped them up into this game. You mean like they do with every one of their games now? It is uniquely a FromSoft game. Considering there's dozens of Souls clones that exist in the industry at this point, FromSoftware games aren't any more special than any other Souls clone that's been released. And ain't that the goddamn truth? They were just the first to grandfather the genre, so they're considered to be the best by default. When in reality, other Souls-likes have surpassed them in more ways than one, including the Neo games, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, and others. And that's really the truth. FromSoftware has been overtaken within the genre that they literally created. There are other Souls-likes better than the actual games that's produced by FromSoftware. Everyone just thinks FromSoftware is the best because they were the ones who introduced this subgenre. But truthfully speaking, that's not the case. All of their games have been iterated upon each other from Demon's Souls onward. You mean all of their games have been copy-paste since 2009. That's what he literally meant to say. I think it'd be foolish for a game company to try and completely redesign and create all new mechanics for each entry in the franchise. Well, it's a good thing that this isn't a franchise. It's a series of games that are separate from each other that have mechanics, UI, systems, and so on regurgitated with each release because it prints money, and none of those things are improved a great deal between each entry. Ubisoft does the same crap with the Assassin's Creed series, and even that has more evolution than anything FromSoftware has released between 2009 to now. I don't see it as an intrinsic problem that they reuse design, animations, hell, anything they've already spent time and money making that is still high enough quality. Again, this goes back to the low standards highlight I mentioned earlier. You may not think it's a problem, but it is a problem, hence the criticism. I wouldn't say it's a problem if it wasn't a problem. FromSoftware reusing animations and sound effects and other things that's copy and paste in their games is the same shit that Ubisoft does with their games. But because FromSoftware panders to the hardcore crowd, the hardcore gaming audience, it's considered to be a good thing. It's not a good thing. Continuing onward, the story in all of the FromSoftware games is presented in a short but relatively dense intro cinematic covering the base idea of the game and what your overall objective is. And that's as much story as they give you. A story that lasts for 2 minutes isn't a story, by fact. Like with their previous games, the story and backstory of these actors comes from the interaction with NPCs and item descriptions, along with side ambient storytelling. That's not ambient storytelling. That's window dressing the fact that the game doesn't have a story to tell. I suppose Terrence Malick also makes story-driven films as well by this faulty logic. Like I mentioned earlier, I want to see a FromSoftware fanboy sit down and watch a Terrence Malick movie and tell me that his films are good or not, and tell me whether or not he's a good film director. Because what Terrence Malick does with his movies is no different from what FromSoftware does with their games on a narrative level. Item descriptions isn't storytelling, just like the random common video game trope with lost audio tapes isn't storytelling, because the context isn't there. The context is what's important. If there's no context, then nothing connects itself together as a unified whole, and that's not a story. Context is what's missing in a lot of FromSoftware games, because the games are designed for the player to make up their own interpretation of various things that may or may not have happened in the worlds that FromSoftware makes. That is why item descriptions isn't storytelling, because there is no context. One simple word. It's one simple word that FromSoftware fans don't understand. Continuing onward, that is exactly what so many of us find intriguing and engaging. Fair enough, but to say that there is a story when there factually isn't is ridiculous and nonsensical at best. Just saying. All of that information is there. It's on the player to find it or not. Bullshit. What you just did is make an excuse. The reason to care is what you make of it. You can't make something from nothing when it comes to storytelling. As an audience member, you can't take something if you don't get anything. I mean, I guess you could, but you would have to be pretty fucking stupid. Then again, FromSoftware fans, right? The information that you're saying is not present is actually all there. It's not. And what is there, which isn't much of anything, can easily be picked apart just as I did with the Millennium Mog connection, which is around an hour into the video, if that. Which ironically, no one mentioned that at all. Ironically, because motherfuckers are clicking on the video and not watching the damn thing all the way through. Or they are watching everything all the way through, but they're ignoring what I'm actually saying. Because they're either too lazy or too stupid, is more than likely the latter, to actually make a counter argument against anything that I'm saying in the video. It's very simple. The statement, "there is not a single line of dialogue from your character," is incorrect. Okay, now you're wasting my time because you're lying. There is not a single line of spoken dialogue from the character you make in these games, not one by fact. Verbal, spoken dialogue. There is none. And then they admit, is it spoken? No. Point taken. The dialogue means nothing in Elden Ring because it's a non-verbal exchange. The same goes with the Dark Souls games and Demon Souls. None of it really means anything, especially when there's no context. The lack of voice acting throughout most of the game just emphasizes what's wrong with FromSoftware's approach to narrative design. There are too many games to name that have mute protagonists. It's a staple of that JRPG genre. Well, for one, these games aren't typical JRPGs for one, and for two, the JRPGs that have mute protagonists do so because of either budgetary constraints or standard series tropes, of which FromSoftware falls into neither category. This person really has nothing to say at this point. The reason to care about your character is the fact that it is your character and your representation in this world. Again, bullshit. I didn't create the world, nor the characters in it, so my representation needs to be expressed in a more definitive manner, which other RPGs do a much better job than FromSoftware has ever done. And I'm talking about games like The Witcher, Persona, Final Fantasy, Fallout, Mass Effect, Dragon Age. All of these games do a much better job at giving the player something to latch onto when it comes to storytelling. FromSoftware is not even in the same fucking conversation. They're not in the same league by comparison. You want them to be pointless and meaningless, so you ignored everything that was there. This is another excuse. What I want from an RPG is a good story, or at least an attempted story. These Souls-like games fail at both. Again, by fact. Even the guy you're talking to in the gameplay behind this section, Rogier, has a plotline and motives. Yet there is no reason to care because the game doesn't explain who Rogier is. A random character placed in a random spot that's introduced to the player with no backstory to explain why the player should be invested. Again, context. Very simple word. Context. You've done nothing to actually address my or anyone else's criticisms against Elden Ring or these games in general except make excuses and state ridiculous arguments that honestly make little to no sense. In any case, thanks for stopping by. And then after this person posted at least, I believe, 1 or 2 more comments. And this is what I had to say in response. I don't care about other videos from other channels. If the argument stands, then it stands. The various challenges you speak of are randomly inserted bosses that have been copy-pasted throughout an empty and lifeless bloated environment by fact. There's a lot of bosses in Elden Ring that's copy and pasted, literally. I only showed one example of that. But there's a lot of bosses in the game that you have to fight twice. And it's not just the optional bosses, but it's some of the main bosses as well. This is why I call FromSoftware lazy, because I haven't really seen any other video game do that, the way they've done it here with Elden Ring. And it just goes to show how weak they are when it comes to making an open world game, and how much content they actually didn't have to put in the game, so they just took what was already there, which wasn't much of anything, and just, again, copy and pasted throughout the game. And this is something that Ubisoft does. Again, Ubisoft doesn't get away with the criticism, but FromSoftware does. And that's bullshit. I don't want to trivialize the game. The game should be designed well enough to where no one should have to trivialize it. It's not well designed, hence all the cheating exploits players are going through in order to force some kind of enjoyment out of the experience. Seriously, all of these different videos about Elden Ring regarding item dupes and how to farm 5 million runes, or going on eBay and buying runes for $20. Players are forcing themselves to like the game at that point. No one should have to dupe items in order to accomplish a very basic task within any game. That shouldn't be a thing. I don't know nor care about Zelda, but Elden Ring doesn't offer a dense world in the sense that it's filled with a great variety of enemies or set pieces. The enemies are copy and paste, the same as the bosses, yet the game gives the player no reason to care about any of them. The dungeons, which include the catacombs and caves, all have the same aesthetic design with slightly different layouts, but each with the same objective to unlock some random door, so the player can fight yet another random boss dozens of times throughout the open world. This is literally the content that they have in Elden Ring's open world. A bunch of dungeons that are copy and pasted, a bunch of bosses that are copy and pasted, a bunch of enemies that are copy and pasted. None of it is unique. So why the game has gotten all these high-ass reviews literally makes no sense. There is not an in-stone upgrading system for the horse. None. I'm not even going to comment on that because it's a waste of time. You can't attack on the horse on the left or the right side with the same weapon. I shouldn't have to break this down to this degree to express a simple point. And what I mean is, you can't attack on the horse with the same weapon on the left or the right hand side on the same button. Instead, the way FromSoftware designed it, they designed it as if you're just on foot and you attack with the weapon that's in your left hand using the upper shoulder button on the left hand side. And that's basically me saying that the combat system on the horse in the game is clunky and unintuitive, instead of being smooth and simple enough to control. The fall damage, the way it was developed here, is bullshit and doesn't work for an open world game like this. Period. That's not the style of the world they were building. I know, that's the problem. The world they've built is boring and repetitive, both visually and contextually. Flight would introduce so many issues in terms of level design. See, this is the bullshit right here. This is what I'm talking about when I say FromSoftware fans are fucking not very smart. This is what I'm talking about when I say FromSoftware fans make excuses. These people are professional programmers working in a professional environment. There is no reason why flight in a fantasy open world game can't be achieved. Final Fantasy 15 did it. Middle-earth Shadow of War did it. Horizon Forbidden West did it. Even Nier Automata found a more creative way to do it. You know, with the flight being on rails during specific scripted sections throughout that game, right? Flight would add next to nothing in this style of game. Bullshit. It would make navigation faster, as I stated in the video. This person truly believes that having more unique and diverse ways for the player to actually traverse the environment would be a bad thing, and it wouldn't quote-unquote add anything to the game. Again, this person really doesn't have any arguments, because everything that they're stating is nonsensical. There's not a real point of arguing your opinion, because you have no real argument, which you just admitted. You're saying a lot of things, and each of them are being debunked rather easily. I beat General Radon as a pure melee. Okay, and? That doesn't mean that fight isn't poorly designed simply because you beat him with a melee build. The point I made was that he's too big to accommodate the limited combat system, and his design is ridiculous to boot. Just about all of the bosses in Elden Ring have this issue. Most of them are too big to accommodate for the combat system, which doesn't fit with how large many of them are. That's the point I was making about the General Radon boss fight. And there's plenty of other examples in the game that point to what I was saying. Fairness is subjective. No, it's not subjective at all. Either the game is fair or it's not fair. There's nothing subjective to be said about whether a game is fair or not. They're beatable without taking a single hit at level 1. Any game is beatable without taking a single hit. That is not a fucking argument. More than 99% of all players are going to take a hit, especially in a game like this. That's not an argument, that's an excuse. So at this point, this person really has nothing to say, as I'm showcasing here. You're meant to fight bosses over and over, and that's a problem. The design of the game is nonsense. For that reason, you purchased the game you did not want with the intent to prove what it is, a bad game. No, I purchased the game, as I showed in the video, at the very fucking beginning of the video, because it was requested. I didn't go into it to prove anything. The game is what the game is. I play these games with a nonconformist attitude, unlike most, with a neutral stance, unlike most, and if the game is good, then it's good. If it's not good, then it's not good. It is what it is. Some will agree, some won't, but the truth still remains either way. And the truth is that Elden Ring is a piece of dog shit, for the reasons that I stated in the video. For the objective reasons, the valid reasons that I stated in the video, in a very thorough manner, that motherfuckers, I'm sure, can understand. That the dumbest of FromSoftware's cult-like fan base can understand. Don't get me wrong, I appreciate your comment, but your arguments here aren't anything I haven't already heard a dozen times before. When you cover entertainment on a public space like YouTube, you're bound to play or watch things you don't enjoy. Comes with the territory. I appreciate it and also wish you the same. So, that was long-winded, but in a nutshell, I completely destroyed this person's argument. A lot of what they were saying about how the game is apparently fair because the top 1% of the top 1% of players can play the game at level 1 without taking any damage is a stupid-ass argument. A lot of what they were saying, such as FromSoftware not having other ways for the player to traverse the environment, the open world, by not allowing flight or swimming mechanics to be implemented, is bullshit. A lot of what they were saying about the game has a story because of item descriptions and interacting here and there with NPCs, which is hardly ever the fucking case in this game, or in these games in general, is also bullshit. I mean, it really isn't hard to pick apart a Souls-like fanboys argument when the games are so poorly designed that you can make an entire fucking paragraph just on one point, and then include several details within that paragraph that thoroughly explain your viewpoint in a way where no one can really come up with a counter-argument, because what you're saying makes sense. And again, I think I've been very fair with my review. It's been over 12 days since that video was uploaded, and the comments were just turned off. As I'm recording this, earlier this morning, I deactivated them, and I'm not turning them back on. because all motherfuckers want to do is troll the video instead of actually doing what this person did and try and spin an argument that actually makes sense. But you see, From Software fans, most of them are too stupid to even attempt. And then the ones that are smart enough to try, they don't do a very good job of it, as I've just showed. Now, there's one other person that posted a response and tried to actually rebut one of the points that I made in the video. But they didn't go in depth to the degree that this fishy person did. And to make matters worse, their argument within of itself is bullshit. So let's see what they had to say. This Joel George person. So this is what this person had to say. You're conflating good open world with aesthetically pleasing movement. No, I'm not. And that sentence within of itself makes no sense. Good open world and Elden Ring do not belong in the same sentence. It has nothing to do with aesthetics. It actually has something to do with the word that starts with the letter M, which I'll go over. Besides that, I think much of the setting and scale of the game must have gone far over your head. Yeah, sure. Okay. You realize the setting is post-apocalyptic high fantasy, right? And that's relevant because... why? The point of the story that you see a brief glimpse of is that it is already clearly too late for anything negotiable to happen. In terms of the scale issue, despite the introduction of the open world, I think all it does is flesh out the two things FromSoft has been trying to get right in their past 6 games. Atmosphere and environmental storytelling. Yeah, that's bullshit. Atmosphere is one thing, but environmental storytelling? Really? I don't think so. Much of the fun is immersing yourself in that world. Yeah, I disagree with that completely. Don't trample through the garden and then complain that the gardener did a shitty job when all he wanted you to do was stop and smell the roses. That's a fucking stupid ass analogy. That's dumb. Did he get that shit from a fortune cookie? A perfect example are your complaints about Radon. He's a demigod. If you were paying attention to the story, there is no story. You'd comprehend that the fight is designed the way it is to communicate the scale of the encounter via environmental storytelling. That's fucking stupid, but okay. This person clearly doesn't know what the hell they're talking about. Same thing with the summons, and the literal run-up to the boss, etc. Seems like you might just be spoiled on yearly AAA open-world releases, and it's overshadowing your ability to perceive the game at the scale it's meant to be played, as well as the ability to pick up on details within the environment that hint to narrative clues through sheer inference. No, motherfucker. There is no motherfucking environmental storytelling in these games. Like what this person is trying to sell to me in this dumbass comment right here. Being spoiled on yearly AAA open world releases, really? Only a FromSoftware fanboy can come up with some bullshit like this. Only a FromSoftware drone could come up with something stupid like this. Once the formula they went with sinks in, it does detract a little from the play experience, and some of the bosses feel the worst they felt in the whole franchise. Did this motherfucker just passively agree with me? I mean, is that seriously what just happened? Though the bulk of your review just kind of makes you look like Patrick Star when he's angry and can't see his own forehead. Yeah, that's fucking cute. It's stupid, but it's fucking cute. That's probably the most clever insult that I've seen, that I've read from a FromSoftware drone. It's like you went into it pissed about Dark Souls 3, and not willing to give it a chance until you've left unsatisfied. That's funny, considering I didn't really mention anything about Dark Souls 3 throughout the entire fucking video. Where at any point throughout the 2 hour and 23 minutes that video was running did I state that I was angry about Dark Souls 3? If anything, what I said about Elden Ring is that it's too similar to Dark Souls 3, and FromSoftware literally went in and copy and pasted animations and sound cues and even hired the same voice actors among a variety of other things, along with reusing the same goddamn engine that Dark Souls 3 used. And that's part of what makes it boring, because it's just the same game that I've already played that came out years ago. I did mention that, but I never said anything about me being pissed about Dark Souls 3. So now this person's just making up shit. Again, because they have no argument. But continuing onward with what they're saying, having the majority of the game's themes, new mechanics, and narrative beats go over your head. Sorry, I guess. The only thing I'm sorry about is having to read this comment in the first place, because this person also has no argument and they're making up bullshit. They're doing exactly what FromSoftware wants them to do, which is to actively make up shit to interpret something about Elden Ring without seeing what is actually there and what FromSoftware actually developed, which is a bland and boring open world game with a bunch of copy and paste bullshit throughout that has no story of any kind and has the same simple-minded and ambiguous lore pasted throughout. The motherfuckers think that's the equivalent of legit storytelling. And as a screenplay writer, as someone who's written a screenplay, actually as someone who's written multiple screenplays, I find it ironic how motherfuckers think they know so much about storytelling, right? Yet they use a game that really doesn't have a story as a basis to support their argument. That's not how that works. So here's what I had to say in response to this ridiculous comment that I should have just marked as troll bait, because that's essentially what it is. I'm not conflating anything. That ironically is what you're doing, and you don't even see it. Besides that, I think much of the setting and scale of the game must have gone over your head. And I think you're a fool for thinking that, because clearly that's the case. I don't give a shit about what the setting is. What does that have to do with the boring gameplay? The Last of Us is post-apocalyptic, and it's more interesting by comparison. Horizon is post-apocalyptic, and is more interesting by comparison. Even Days Gone, which was a terrible game, is post-apocalyptic, and even that is better by comparison. The point of the story. There is no damn story. There's only your interpretation of lore. Lore by itself is not storytelling. And FromSoftware fans, clearly, the majority of them, don't know the fucking difference between storytelling and lore. They're two entirely separate things. Much of the fun is immersing yourself in that world. Bullshit. You can't immerse yourself in something that has the depth of a kiddie pool. Don't trample through the garden and then complain that the gardener did a shitty job when all he wanted you to do was stop and smell the roses. Don't try raising analogies that make zero sense in a sad attempt to sound intelligent when it has nothing to do with anything regarding the video topic. Seriously, that was just the dumbest part of his entire comment. That deliberately was a case of someone who thinks they're smart, but just proved how dumb they actually are, how ignorant they actually are. If you were paying attention to the story, there is no story. Not going to keep repeating the same point over and over. The fight is designed the way it is to communicate the scale of the encounter via environmental storytelling. Again, bullshit. The sizes of the boss characters have nothing to do with environmental storytelling. Do you know how stupid you sound? The Radon fight is poor because of the character size. It's not mechanically in tune with the game's combat system. And there's that word, mechanically, which is what I was referring to earlier. Making excuses and pulling random nonsense out of your ass about environmental storytelling is how a lazy developer like FromSoftware gets away with such terrible design philosophies that in reality aren't unique or memorable, and is really the reason why FromSoftware will never be in the mainstream, at least in the traditional sense. The reason people play FromSoftware games isn't because they're great, it's because they're told they're great, and then they end up believing they're great because of the fucking cult fan base, even though they're not really all that great. If you're told something enough times, you kind of start to believe it after a while, unless you're smart enough to think for yourself, which most gamers aren't. This explains how these Souls-like games became popular. People were pre-ordering Elden Ring who never played these games before because they were told how great they are, which is how a lot of different people ended up being disappointed. Players on PC with the lazy-ass PC port that was fucking poorly optimized and is still poorly optimized now. Players on console who have had save issues and whatnot. Players who went into this game thinking, oh, you know, I'm getting a great experience. I'm getting a great action experience, a great open world experience. And then slowly realizing just how overrated the fucking shit is. And that there's far better games on the market by comparison. That's what I'm talking about. Seems like you might just be spoiled on yearly AAA open world releases, and it's overshadowing your ability to perceive the game at the scale it's meant to be played, as well as the ability to pick up on details within the environment that hint to narrative clues through sheer inference. Talk about a run-on sentence that had a lot of words, yet said nothing. It seems you lack the ability to understand the difference between contextual stability versus actual mechanical stability, as well as the meaning of the word storytelling. And From Software games are just as yearly as the yearly AAA games you just mentioned, when every single one of their games now is a copy-paste job, game after game, time and time again. What this person's argument basically boils down to is he's arguing the contextual stability of From Software's design. He's basically saying that the game has a story because it has context through environmental storytelling. And I say that's bullshit because it is indeed bullshit. The lack of context in Elden Ring isn't magically there simply because of how big certain bosses are. Environmental storytelling does not exist in Elden Ring simply because of how large certain boss characters are in the game, or because of the game's atmosphere. That's not how environmental storytelling works. And it tells me that this person really hasn't played too many open world games. Other recent open world games, such as Spider-Man, the Spider-Man games, or Ghost of Tsushima, or Horizon Zero Dawn, or Horizon Forbidden West, or The Witcher 3, and so on, all of these games do a much better job at environmental storytelling than From Software. And there's plenty of examples that point to what I'm talking about that I can make a separate video on, but I don't feel like it. I'm not going to keep making videos to explain why Elden Ring sucks. It sucks for the reasons that I stated in my original review. You can either agree or disagree, but making up random bullshit to spin some kind of elusive argument that you think is clever like these two posters have done doesn't actually make you smart. Continuing onward, storytelling is not environmental in these games, never has been, never will be. Item descriptions and sizes of characters in a game isn't environmental storytelling. That's wholesomely dumb. And that's just the add-on to what I was saying just now. Though the bulk of your review just kind of makes you look like Patrick Star when he's angry and can't see his own forehead. Well, first of all, I don't like SpongeBob SquarePants and never really have. So that means nothing to me, first off. And second, the entirety of my review makes several points, most of which you haven't addressed, yet you jump into my comments chain with stupid analogies and comparisons pretending that you know what you're talking about. Yet you don't know anything, and the points you did try to address don't actually explain in proper detail why my viewpoint is incorrect, because you don't truly have an actual argument that's grounded in common sense. Your so-called environmental storytelling shtick doesn't make bad gameplay somehow good because you've conjured in your head how you think the game developer wants you to think about their work. It really doesn't matter how you perceive gameplay when said gameplay is stagnant, dead in the water. It's not changing to fit your idea of what it is. It is what it is. The gameplay in the game is broken at several points, specifically when it comes to the bosses, because the bosses mechanically don't fit from a mechanical standpoint within the combat system in a way that works without the numerous issues they have with regards to things like clipping through the camera or terribly designed delayed attack animations, or area of effect attack animations that's one-sided in the computer's favor, things that you haven't brought up not once in your argument. Your so-called environmental storytelling doesn't take bad gameplay and magically make it good. If that's your argument, then your argument is weak and not worth listening to. It's like you went in pissed about Dark Souls 3 and not willing to give it a chance, and you left unsatisfied. No, I went into it neutral like every game I play, knowing what it already was, knowing that it was the same thing regurgitated, the same thing that's never been truly special or unique as many claim it is, and walked away from it expecting it to be the overhyped dreck that it is, and ironically, that's exactly what happened. Having the majority of the game's theme, new mechanics, and narrative beats go over your head. Sorry, I guess. You can't have a theme if you don't have a story. Most of the new mechanics don't radically or drastically change the game to any major degree. Even IGN's review pointed out that it was the exact same experience, they just claimed it to be a good thing. It's not a good thing. In the specific phrase that journalist from IGN's review of Elden Ring, what he actually said was, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, it's been broke for years. So why that piece of misinformation was inserted into their review is beyond me, other than they want to get more clicks on their review, both on YouTube and IGN's actual website. You can't have any narrative beats if you don't have a narrative. The only thing you should be sorry about is wasting my time with this nonsensical comment, which points to someone who played the game and saw what they wanted to see in it instead of actually seeing the game for what it really is. Which is funny that you brought up being spoiled by AAA games when this game is no better than any of the usual AAA crap that's infested the market. In fact, it's worse. And that's the goddamn truth. When you actually want to have a serious conversation about why Elden Ring is somehow great by actually talking about what the game is mechanically, contextually, perhaps then I'll take you serious. But of course, this person never responded, because they didn't really have an argument to begin with. Not to mention everything else that I said in my review that they completely ignored, because they probably didn't watch the fucking thing in its entirety in the first fucking place. Elden Ring is another example of how dumb modern gamers actually are. The vast majority of the modern video game audience is filled with a bunch of fucking idiots who just accept whatever is put in front of them, and they deem it to be great because they were told that it was going to be great via the hype train. And I've spoken before on my channel about why hype trains are dangerous. In this game's case, the fan base is so stupid that they've somehow tricked themselves into believing that a truly terrible open world game that has bad gameplay, no real story of any kind, and jaded exploration is somehow unique. And I blame gaming journalists for this more so than anything else. Because when these professional critics give a game a 10 out of 10 score, because they're trying to recoup as much revenue as possible from these idiots in the gaming community, that's how you get false narratives that are thrown around. Again, just as I emphasized at the end of my review for Elden Ring, it seems that quality within the modern gaming industry is not going to improve anytime soon. And it's because of people like this as to why.